Hallo, hallo, Damen und Herren. Wir sind von der Berlin University Alliance. Wir suchen neue Ideen für die Forschung heute. Wenn du hast eine neue Idee, wir sind hier für Schreiben. Wir gucken eine neue Frage für die Forschung gesucht. Haben Sie vielleicht eine Idee für uns? Wir sind von der Berlin University Alliance. Haben Sie eine Idee für mich vielleicht? Und du? Hast du eine Idee vielleicht für mich auch?
Ja.
Good. Yeah, everything we can make better for the future, like Limo or. What do you think? What can we make better? Make better. Haben Sie Ideen für die Zukunft vielleicht?
Ideen für die Zukunft?
Ja. Guck. Ich bin ein Professor für Berlin University Alliance.
Sehr gut.
Aber ich habe keine mal Idee. Ich habe alles gemacht. So, wir suchen eine neue Idee für die Forschung. Haben Sie vielleicht Bitte. Ich bin jeden Tag heute gucken für eine Idee. Bitte. Das ist eine neue für die Zukunft. Für was?
Ich weiß, was ich glaube.
Gut, sehr gut. Yahoo!
Let me think about it. I have no idea.
Okay. Teleporting.
Los plásticos.
Danke schön.
Danke.
Danke.
Vielen Dank.
Sehr gute Idee für die Forschung. Thank you for the idee. Schönen Tag. Also, gute Fahrt.
Cancer, the cellular plague since the dawn of humanity. Film 1, Discovering and Fighting. To tell the story of cancer is to tell the story of every scientific revolution since the dawn of humanity. Anesthesia, which allowed surgery, synthetic chemistry, radium, the rapid proliferation of medical imaging, and genetics. Because cancer is essentially made up of cells that have escaped the mechanism of programmed death and develop uncontrollably. The oldest known trace of cancer was discovered on the foot bone of a 1.7 million year old hominid. His toe bears the trace of an invasive tumor to this day. In the 3rd millennium BC, the vizier and physician of King Joza, in the first known medical treatise, compared cancerous tumours to unripe fenugreek fruit. Under the heading Treatment, he wrote, None. It was around 400 BC that cancer received its name. It was chosen by Hippocrates, the founding father of medicine. The Greek physician believed that these cold, hard tumours resembled a crab buried in the sand, a karkinos in Greek. Hippocrates' theory of the 4 humours endured long after his life ended. According to this theory, all illnesses were linked to an excess of certain liquids in the body, the humours. Inflammations, the red humours, were linked to an overabundance of blood. Nodules and edema were linked to an overabundance of lymph, the white humour. Jaundice and liver disorders indicated an overabundance of yellow bile. Finally, the elusive black bile that spreads throughout the body was considered the worst of the humours and blamed for melancholy, dear to Baudelaire, spleen, and cancerous tumours. Once again, no known treatment. In 1533, André Vesalius, a young student from Brussels, arrived in Paris to study medicine. The anatomy classes were a disappointment. Dissections were staged like plays at the theatre, but nobody seemed to learn anything from them. Vesalius then began to dissect and draw for himself, later becoming the first person to accurately map out the human anatomy. His brain sections foreshadowed modern scanners by centuries. He mapped out the path of the blood vessels, traced the yellow bile, and sketched the lymphatic system, but he found no trace of black bile, the extraction of which could have cured cancer. Hippocrates' theory of the humours became obsolete and was gradually abandoned. In the 19th century, the appearance of anesthesia and antiseptics revolutionized surgery. For cancer, it was a first ray of hope. A century later, a surgeon named William Halsted developed the concept of radical surgery. Encouraged by the first ever victories against cancer, his operations on cancerous tumours grew bolder and bolder. For the first time, cancer had been defeated by the steel of the scalpel. Certain tumours, detected soon enough, could be cured by an early operation. But in other cases, the tumours returned and continued to migrate and spread. We must wait a little longer to arrive at the age of modern medicine, with the discovery of radiotherapy and chemotherapy.
Alors pour moi, le centre Marc Bloch, c'est une nouvelle aventure personnelle et professionnelle, mais c'est surtout contribuer à un centre qui a une histoire très forte, de pluridisciplinarité. C'est quelque chose dont on parle beaucoup, mais qui n'est pas tant que ça mis en pratique.
Also mit der Mehrsprachigkeit, also das finde ich was Besonderes, eben, dass bei den Veranstaltungen jeder in seiner Sprache spricht.
Was das Centre für mich ausmacht, ist, dass Leute zusammenkommen, die alle an einem ganz individuellen Projekt arbeiten. Aber wenn man dann ins Gespräch kommt, dann findet man immer gemeinsame Punkte, Anknüpfungspunkte, die einen dann für die eigene Forschung inspirieren.
Principalement, je dirais que c'est vraiment l'environnement de travail qui est pour moi très agréable, très chaleureux, très convivial.
Mais c'est évidemment aussi du club maté. Ça, c'est la boisson favorite de Berlin, qu'on boit dans les clubs, mais aussi au Club Marc Bloch, évidemment.
Das Diskussionsklima insgesamt, dass es sozusagen so ein Grundverständnis gibt, sich auf Standpunkte einzulassen, die erstmal völlig fremd wirken oder ungewohnt wirken und das dann als Bereicherung mitzunehmen.
Alongside globalization and climate change, the rise of digital technologies is transforming the global economy. Since the 1990s, more computing power, bigger data, and faster internet connections have been changing the world of work, leading to the emergence of new kinds of business, new ways of working, and revolutionizing job markets. At the same time, productive employment and decent work are two essential elements of sustainable development. They allow people to escape poverty on their own. So, how can the digitalization of the world of work help people do this? What opportunities do the trends of digital labor platforms, digital service outsourcing, and digital enterprises offer for more and better jobs? And what are the challenges? Supported by a team of researchers, experts, and local stakeholders in our partner countries, India and Rwanda, the GIZ project, Future of Work, analyze the current situation in each country and develop scenarios that look ahead to 2030. Let's take a look at the future of work in India. Home to 1.4 billion people, India is set to become the world's most populous country. But since 2016, the country's economy has seen flagging growth, a rise in unemployment, and a growing informal sector driving the labor market into an employment crisis.
Film 3. Targeting and Fighting. Our immune system is a highly complex biological system. Every day, it produces billions of new cells devoted to defending our body against invaders, bacteria, or viruses. It has its own production sites, foremost among them in the thymus and spleen, with hundreds more in the lymph nodes, its own distribution channels, the lymphatic vessels, and an entire arsenal of weapons to deal with every possible threat. So why can't our immune system simply destroy the cancer cells that are so intent on destroying us? What is the body's police up to? Thanks to advances in the field of cancer immunology, we now understand how cancer cells manage to avoid detection. In the 1990s, immunology researchers James Allison and Tasuku Honjo began to take an interest in T cells, the body's police force. These keepers of law and order have receptors on their surface that allow them to recognize healthy cells. When T-cell receptors come into contact with healthy cells, they sign a kind of non-aggression pact. But cancer cells are masters of deception, producing receptors of their own that they use to deceive the T-cells at the points of contact. This gave the researchers the idea of using trained antibodies to block these checkpoints. Once the cancer cell had been unmasked, the immune response could finally be activated against it. But that was just the beginning. The antibodies produced by our immune system had plenty more surprises in store. These tiny proteins also had the ability to target cancer cells and interfere with their replication mechanisms. This is the idea at the heart of the research conducted in the TACT project. Today, chemotherapy remains the most commonly administered treatment for cancer. Its cytotoxic power is ruthlessly effective against cancer cells. The problem is that chemotherapy also affects healthy cells. But what if the antibodies themselves could be used to deliver chemotherapy drugs directly to the cancer cells, and only them? A form of chemotherapy that would directly target affected cells while leaving healthy ones untouched. This is what we call an antibody-drug conjugate. But there's more. Some antibodies are able to bind to cancer cells and T-cells, bringing the two together. Once the introductions have been made, the T-cells can get to work. We call these antibodies bispecific antibodies. For 4 years, the 11 PhD students at TACT have been pursuing various avenues of research. Some have been thinking about the best way to attach cytotoxic drugs to antibodies to make sure their cargo is delivered only to cancer cells. Others have been encapsulating chemotherapy drugs in nanoparticles to make it easier for them to penetrate cancer cells with no risk of them being released into the body. Still others have been figuring out which substances are best suited to fighting particular types of cancer. Their research and discoveries, like those of all their predecessors and contemporaries, bring new contributions to the field every day. Having started from zero more than 5,000 years ago, thanks to the gradual accumulation of data, new generations of treatments, and targeted therapies, we now have an ever-growing arsenal at our disposal. Our hope is that one day, the most destructive cellular plague humanity has ever faced will be consigned to the history books once and for all.
Say that one of the challenges for strategic litigation, not being a lawyer, is really how to get to the structural issues. Because I'm not sure that the law necessarily allows you to get to the structural issues. And so I think strategic litigation would be important if we can think about the ways in which it deals with larger economic policy issues. And what I find is that a lot of litigation works on corporations, and that's good. I'm not against them at all. But how do we get to the kind of economic policy realm that these corporations operate in? How do we change those structures? How do we change the regulatory framework that allows these companies to do what they do? And I'm not sure that that's easy, but I think that should be the direction that people need to think about, is how do we change the regulatory framework? And also that we have a globalized economy, and litigations that cross borders are much harder, at least from what I understand. So what do you do with the financial sector that goes from one place to the other in seconds? How do you litigate that? And often they have political clout. And they, at least in the US where I live, they own a lot of politicians. So how do you litigate the way to get their clout? So I would say those are some of the issues that I think we need to think about strategically in terms of litigation.
La performance comme recherche, ou Performance as Research en anglais, est une approche scientifique qui considère que toute pratique artistique est en elle-même une forme de recherche dont résulte une production de connaissances. Selon cette approche, une performance artistique peut constituer un apport scientifique au même titre que les formes théoriques plus traditionnelles. La performance comme recherche se distingue parfois de ce qu'on appelle la Practice as Research, en mettant l'accent sur le rôle de la répétition, de l'entraînement à la tournée, dans les processus de production de connaissances incarnées.
Alors, le Performance Lab est issu d'une dynamique, je vais dire, de 3 laboratoires. Donc, un laboratoire des géographes, des informaticiens, LGK, et l'ITAR, des personnes qui travaillaient en art du spectacle. Et donc, on voulait se regrouper avec des grandes questions de corps, société et technologie. Et ce qui est intéressant pour nous, donc, c'est un travail de travailler sur une sorte d'interdisciplinarité sur le site de Grenoble, du GIA. C'est-à-dire, ces disciplines, normalement, sont isolées l'une à l'autre.
On a eu des gènes pathogènes en lagune ébriée, du Pseudomonas qui donne des furoncles. On a Escherichia coli qui donne des gastro-entériques. Nous avons aussi du Vibrio qui donne parfois du choléra. Donc déjà, ces grandes bactéries-là sont endémiques dans la ville d'Abidjan.
Surveillez. Bonjour, ça va? Qui a marqué le but? C'est toi. Ah, c'est bon, super. Ici, nous avons un grand caniveau et tout ce caniveau déverse en lagune. On est arrivé au point de prélèvement, on va prélever là. Poudou, on va prélever là, parce qu'il faut qu'on ait un peu la contamination qui descend de versant. Et l'autre côté là-bas.
In January 2018, the Turkish army and their allied armed groups invaded the region of Afrin, Syria. What started then has been continuing until today. An attack on the local, mainly Kurdish population, consisting of torture, killings, and arbitrary arrests, expulsing them from their homes and thus depriving them of their livelihoods. These acts, committed by Islamist militia groups and the Turkish army, constitute crimes under international law. Together with 6 survivors of these atrocities, the ECCHR, Syrians for Truth and Justice, and their partners have filed a criminal complaint to the German federal prosecutor, demanding an investigation into the perpetrators and offering evidence for such investigations. But to understand why this happened, let's look back to Afrin, before the invasion. In northwestern Syria, along the Turkish border, lies Afrin, a district renowned for a beautiful landscape and rich agriculture. An estimated 13 million olive trees covered the landscape, with over 360 Kurdish villages. Afrin stands as the most densely Kurdish populated region in Syria. However, Arab communities, Alawi, Yazidi, and Syriac Christian minorities have historical roots there, and the land was graced with numerous religious shrines and archaeological sites that reflect this diverse local culture. At the heart of Afrin city stood the monumental statue of Kawa the blacksmith, a symbol of Kurdish resistance. In 2011, a wave of uprisings against the Bashar al-Assad regime swept across Syria, met with a harsh and brutal response from the government. This marked the inception of a violent and catastrophic conflict in the country. Kurdish armed forces known as the PYD established an autonomous administration across northern Syria, which expanded to include Afrin in 2014. For 4 years, Afrin avoided becoming a site of intense violence. It served as a relatively safe region for those seeking refuge from other parts of the country, where the agriculture-based economy continued and even grew. However, Turkey views the PYD as a terrorist organization and perceived the autonomous Kurdish corridor along its southern border as an existential threat, which the Turkish military moved to disrupt. Operation Olive Branch was launched in 2018 to seize control of Afrin. The attack began with extensive and indiscriminate airstrikes, followed by a ground invasion. However, by the time the city was also taken on March 18, it had already been mostly evacuated. Cultural monuments, including Kawa the blacksmith, were destroyed as Turkish flags were raised over the landscape. The Kurdish-led administration was pushed out, and armed groups allied with the Turkish military took control of Afrin. Since the invasion, a Turkish-backed administration has been established in Afrin. Armed groups, which continue to hold power with knowledge and support of Turkey, commit daily atrocities like arbitrary arrests of civilians, torture, sexual violence, and killings. At the same time, systematic looting and property theft continue to displace the original population and prevent their return. Armed groups quickly seized the abandoned properties, spraying their names on buildings to signal zones of control. Many of the olive trees have been stolen, cut, and burned. Celebrations of Nowruz, the Kurdish New Year, have been banned. School curriculums and street signs that were once in Kurdish have been changed to Turkish and Arabic. The Kurdish population of Afrin, which was estimated to be above 90% before the invasion, has now drastically dwindled. These acts constitute war crimes and crimes against humanity. Under the principle of universal jurisdiction, these can be investigated anywhere in the world. Yet, the atrocities in Afrin that cause great suffering to the local population continue with impunity to this day. On behalf of the victims, the ECCHR, Syrians for Truth and Justice, and their partners, demand the German federal public prosecutor to investigate these crimes and the persons known to be responsible for them.